Good morning. My name is Albuquerque. I'm from the Catholic University in Portugal, and the title of my presentation is Beyond Pancakes for Breakfast, Assessing Cultural Awareness in the EFL Classroom. Now, we all know that culture is connected with language and has always played a part in the English as a foreign language classroom. However, the perspectives on how to deal with the cultural aspects of the foreign language are very different among teachers, students, and also researchers. So Kumarava Di Vello says that the complexity of culture adds to the complexity of language learning and teaching, and this makes the whole process even more complex. Brown, on the other hand, says that culture and language are inseparable, and so that the acquisition of a second language is also the acquisition of a second culture, except for specialized instrumental acquisition, and this goes along the same lines with Chong, who says that English for those learners who will learn the language or to communicate with other non-native speakers of language, then language will mostly be a tool of communication and not one by which they would explore the English culture or the traditions with. So if culture is assumed to be part of language and vice versa, the question for EFL classes is whether this learning should be assumed as automatic, or whether it should be made explicit. Now, the research questions that guided this study are four, and I'm going to read them. So the first one was whether the teaching of language and the teaching of culture are indeed inseparable. The second one, is it possible to learn a language without learning about its culture, and to learn about a culture without learning the language? The third, should the teaching of language integrate EFL course syllabi and courses specifically? And if so, how? And in the globalized internet world we live in today, which aspects of culture should be brought into the classroom to enhance students' awareness of the Anglophone cultures they may engage with in their professional and personal lives? Now, traditionally, these are some common representations of cultural aspects in textbooks. So the difference between American breakfast and British breakfast is typical. Talking about the weather in Britain is typical. And these representations of the British character in a funny form are also common. Now, inevitably, we connect some of these representations in textbooks with stereotype cartoons and wonder about how representative such cartoons are of a certain culture. Now, this is the case in this cartoon where, for instance, the Portuguese is represented as non-technological. So, and I can't really understand it as a Portuguese native and a Portuguese native speaker, what the meaning is, whether we are either regressive or violent, or whether we're bad at IT, I suppose, although I had never thought about it. So basically, this helps us ask whether sometimes the teaching of culture doesn't involve strengthening of stereotypes, which obviously should not happen. Kumarava Di Vello, on the other hand, says that cultural stereotypes have always been part of EFL classes, and not only in the West, of course, and most of the times it's probably unconscious, but that this affects several aspects as gender, class, race, language, religion, nationality, ethnicity. So it seems that we know that we stereotype others and others stereotype us, and this is also the reality in EFL classes. Cramsh says that the cultural aspects of language are always in the background of the language classroom. Just like speaking, listening, reading, and writing are the four main skills, then culture is like the fifth skill. And this is probably positive in the sense that, for instance, for good language learners who are confident in their communicative competence, it is very often the cultural aspects which make evident the limitations of their knowledge. And this challenges their ability to learn more about the language and about the culture. So it is actually positive. Ramshaw also questions the separation between language and culture. And he suggests that if language is seen as social practice, then the culture becomes the very core of language teaching, in a sense that cultural awareness should be viewed both as enabling language proficiency and as being the outcome of reflection on language proficiency. Now, he draws from Halliday and Rassand's conception of the relationship between text and culture, whereby every text is an instance of social practice and therefore embedded in a context of situation and a context of culture. And within this perspective, then our ideas, our knowledge, thoughts, and cultures is all there, almost independent of language, but waiting to be expressed by it. The main question for EFL classes is whether these social and cultural meanings should be made explicit. So how many of these meanings should be made explicit, and how many can be understood implicitly? Gonzalez has questioned the teaching policy in her university or in her country, in Costa Rica, and says that program administrations as well as teachers have believed for many years that culture has been part of their programs implicitly. However, because of this, then course programs do not include explicit approaches to teaching culture, and this is not necessarily positive. In the end, that it becomes a hidden agenda. Sometimes the problem with hidden agendas is that it is assumed that culture is taught, but then it is not actually taught. Other researchers like Becquerel actually question whether talking about the culture in the target language is learning about the culture of the language, because obviously we can learn about the culture without learning the language. And so she questions that in the classroom, it is true that you do not encounter another way of life personally. So learning about traditional breakfast in the classroom doesn't make it more real to students than learning about the funeral rites in Egypt, as you do in history lessons. So films, you can learn about culture through other means, not only in classes, but even through films. And you don't even need the language for that, he says, because dubbed films can do this kind of teaching, which is also true. No, Moran has published a book called Teaching Cultures, Perspectives in Practice, where he suggests several approaches to the teaching of culture in the EFL classroom. And he uses the three-dimensional construct, which was originally designed by the anthropologist Edward Hall, based on this, which is called the 3P model, based on practices, products, and perspectives, which would be the basis to understand and analyze cultural phenomena in general. Now, what Moran does is he integrates this 3P model and expands it into a 5-element model, which he calls the iceberg model. Now, the perspective dimension in this model would be represented on the surface, and the rest of the elements would be above the surface of the iceberg. Now, the advantage is that each dimension constitutes a clear, defined area, which can help to identify the complete content of cultural experience that teachers present to learners. So each of the 5 dimensions are connected to language, and learners should become able to identify these connections and use language accordingly in order to define the 4 functions of language. This would be language to participate in the culture, language to describe the culture, language to interpret the culture, and language to respond to the culture. Gonzalez has used this model and defends this approach to teaching culture in the EFL classroom, because the 5 dimensions help to define course objectives and the outcomes explicitly. So from her experience, she says that because of this explicit approach, language program administrators and teachers are able to consider individual learners' needs according to different levels, which they can include in their syllabuses, and then help learners to achieve specific goals. Now, so far, basically, the 2 main questions are whether to include or not to include the cultural aspects in EFL classes, and in case they should be included, because then whether this instruction should be done implicitly or explicitly. Because the answers are not easy, the study intends to assess the perspectives of teachers and students on this matter. So it was conducted at my university, the Catholic University in Portugal in Lisbon, in the summer semester. The results are mostly quantitative. We used 2 different surveys, a survey for the students and a survey for the teachers. The focus of the student surveys is to identify how students value the teaching of culture in EFL classes. It was anonymous, based on 10 Likert type items, and it was sent to all undergraduates in Media and Communication Sciences course and the Applied Foreign Languages course. And there were 92 students who answered the survey. The teachers' survey, the main objective was to learn about teachers' perceptions of teaching culture in the EFL class. It was also anonymous, also based on 10 Likert type items, and it was sent to 5 EFL teachers who were assigned to the Media and Communication Sciences and Applied Foreign Languages classes, and they all volunteered to answer. So this table summarizes the results of the student survey. Generally speaking, most students either agree or strongly agree that learning about culture is essential to learning the language, that cultural aspects like greetings and habits, and also aspects related to arts, literature, music, and cinema should be part of the EFL classroom. They also said that learning a foreign language helped them become more aware of cultural differences between countries, and it would also help to make them more tolerant of other cultures. However, students were divided on whether they get most of their knowledge of English-speaking countries' cultures from EFL classes, and whether they learning about the cultures of English-speaking countries helps them learn more about the language. On the other hand, also the great majority, 95.8%, also either agrees or strongly agrees that the best way to learn about culture is to travel. So not really in EFL classes. And 64.1% trust that they get most of their knowledge about English culture from the internet. Overall, the majority agrees or strongly agrees that foreign language culture should be taught explicitly and in detail in the EFL classroom. The teachers' result, almost all teachers either agree or strongly agree that culture plays an important role in language teaching, just like the students, that the study of culture can enhance students' motivation to learn the language, and that language and culture are naturally bonds with each other, and it is artificial to try to separate them. They tend to agree that combining language and culture helps learners improve language skills, and that cultural aspects such as arts, literature, etc., should also be part of the EFL classroom, as well as greetings and habits. The majority of teachers also agree that cultural awareness makes students more tolerant of other cultures. However, contrary to students' opinions, teachers are divided on whether the cultural dimension in English as a foreign language should be taught clearly and explicitly in the EFL classroom, although this is a very small group of teachers, and it would be interesting to repeat the survey with more teachers. Now, final considerations. So, generally speaking, students and teachers' perspectives align on the significance of culture in language learning, on the importance of culture in EFL classes, and on the integration of cultural aspects in the class. Both students and teachers recognize that cultural knowledge enhances language learning, and that by learning a foreign language, students become more aware of cultural differences and more tolerant towards other culture. Although two teachers are indecisive of whether the cultural dimension in English as a foreign language and culture should be taught clearly and explicitly in the EFL classroom, 3 teachers and the majority of students believe that they are important and that they should be taught explicitly and in detail. Overall, the findings basically aim to assist in making the approach to culture in EFL classes more explicit. And hopefully the results may stimulate reflection among this particular group of students in the short term, and ultimately to help discussion of the topic in other similar contexts. So thank you very much for listening. If you wish to speak to me about such issues, then please send me an email.